So I've been introduced, thank you, I'm Andrea Venezia. I'm Executive Director of EdInsights, which used to be the Institute for Higher Education, Leadership, and Policy. I help at Sac State, and I want to make sure you know who is all here. So why don't we go down the line and then we'll start talking.
I'm Jodi Lewis with EdInsights.
I'm Nancy Brownell. I work for the California State Board of Education on local control and accountability and some on Common Core.
Hi, I'm Tina Penna. I'm the Associate Superintendent for Secondary Education for the Elk Grove Unified School District.
My name is Trunnell. I'm the Director of Curriculum and Professional Learning for the Elk Grove Unified School District.
And hello everybody, I'm Kathy Hamilton, the Director of College and Career Options for Elk Grove Unified School District.
And we figured it would be much more interesting to have an exchange, and this really represents what we were trying to do in our research, which is get a state perspective and then react through our research and bring our voices to the table that we talked with in other districts. And so we can replicate that in a way where we say what we found across a couple districts and 4 high schools, and you can react from a state perspective and you can react from a district perspective. So I'm very grateful. It's much more interesting for all of you than just hearing me. So thank you for taking part in this. And I would love just to get a sense of who's here. How many of you identify as K-12 primarily in your work? Okay. And how many of you post-secondary? All right. And anyone view yourself as both worlds? All right.
How about early learning?
Early learning? Anything else? Shout it out? Okay. It's helpful for us to see who's here, too. So thanks again for coming. So I'm going to lay out what we did in terms of the frame of the research, why we did the research, and how we structured it. And then Jodi is going to talk about a lot of the findings in specific from the work in the districts. And then Nancy will react from the state, you'll react from Elk Grove's perspective. And we really welcome an exchange to the extent that you're all engaged in issues around implementation of the Common Core. These are preliminary findings. For us, we'll be releasing a report in late May, early June. They're preliminary recommendations. Jodi's been writing the first draft of the report this week, so we're learning as we go to prepare for this and to prepare for our release. So we really welcome your ideas as we dig in and think about how to translate what we found into actionable recommendations at the state level and for educators. So the funding for this project, I'll say, came from the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation through the California Education Policy Fund. And we worked with State Board President Mike Hurst to figure out a project that could be done very quickly. We started the research last spring, and then we continued into the fall, and then get information out the door this year. So we were going for something a moment in time, very fast, focused on the implementation of the Common Core at the high school level. So we're really interested in transition issues between high school and post-secondary, but we didn't do research in post-secondary. We stopped short of that. And given our mission at EdInsights about technical assistance and policy implementation cycles, tracking policy implementation from the state down into county and district levels and back up, that frame seemed like a very appropriate one for us. The research is very exploratory. We went to 2 districts and 4 high schools. So we didn't do evaluations, and we're not trying to generalize across the entire state. We did take all the transcripts and look for themes. And so the themes that we highlight aren't just a one-off issue. They were issues that came out across all of the high schools or across all of the state policy interviews, for example. So let me give you a sense of how we structured this work. We first, in the spring of last year, interviewed people at the state policy level. In California, we interviewed about 20 people to understand their expectations for this year for implementation of the Common Core at the high school level. And then we interviewed 4 people in 4 states that were known for being sort of cutting edge for what they were doing in terms of the implementation of the Common Core, part of the Core to College initiative. And then over the summer, we did interviews with 17 people in 10 county offices of education to understand in a kind of nested way then how the expectations at the state level filtered to the county level and what county offices are experiencing in terms of the implementation process and what they're expecting at the district and the school site levels. Okay? Then after we gathered that information, we used that information to inform the questions we wanted to ask at the district and the school site levels. And we went into 2 districts, again, 4 high schools. We've promised them anonymity. Yes?
Did any of the county sites match the schools? You said you did county sites.
Right.
were any of those counties also representative
Representative.
of the schools that you did? Like, was it Sacramento County?
So the 17 individuals that we interviewed in the county offices were not representative of the counties in which the districts and high schools that we studied were
Thank
in.
you.
And we are keeping names anonymous because it provides an opportunity for people to hopefully be as candid as possible without feeling that there could be any repercussions. So again, we're trying to understand the state policy frame and then how that state policy frame is understood and acted upon at the county, district, and local levels. So in terms of the overall frame that we're putting together on the policy side, it's really clear that there's a big attempt in California to do things very differently than other states are doing in terms of implementing the Common Core, and to do things differently than California has done in the past. A lot of interviewees discussed, and I'm sure many of you have been around, for how we've done things somewhat backwards sometimes with our implementation processes in terms of implementing performance standards and then content standards and things like that. And that there's a lot of discussion about lessons learned, and we're not doing that again. We're going to try to be logical and and very patient and thoughtful and deliberate, and give time and space. And that there's a turning over of the sort of compliance and regulatory frame, shedding that and moving into more of a learning frame and a supportive role, and not a focus on sort of punitive actions from the state level. So the field test, for example, provided the goal, as most of you know, is to provide the time and space to learn, in addition to the psychometric needs of the Smarter Balanced Assessment. The use of the early assessment program, staying connected to the Smarter Balanced Assessment, so the 11th grade assessment, adopting that for adopting Smarter Balance to use in the early assessment program to give students a signal of college readiness, staying seamless. But those types of signals are seen as critically important in the policy community to show the stability of this framework being developed, and again, to create a learning environment with a lot of time and space. The other big issue, in addition to the flexibility in time and space, has been the policy swirl, which I know schools have been under for a couple decades now, so it's not hugely new, but there's a lot happening, and I'm not going to map it all. But the concerns raised at the state level about the swirl related to assessment, the technological requirements at the school site level, and the professional development requirements for that. Making sense of and understanding the field test and then this additional year without having an accountability connected. The use of the $1.25 billion for Common Core implementation, local control funding formula and the LCAPs and how to navigate that, updating the quality professional learning standards for in-service professional development, updating standards for teacher prep programs, changing A to G a bit to accept the A to G eligibility requirements for the University of California, to accept more career and technical education courses, and then multiple initiatives at the regional level, including linked learning, Career Pathways Trust, other career and technical education funds from the state, new career and technical funds from the state. So there's a swirl at the regional level, the county level, at the school site level, and one of the things we were interested in is, are these things connected, particularly at the high school to post-secondary levels, with the Common Core focusing on college and career readiness, and then all these other initiatives focusing, is there the capacity to make sense of all of this and put it together coherently, or is it just a bunch of initiatives and streams of dollars and people are trying desperately to put them together, but is that too hard right now? So what's the capacity to connect the dots in the high school to college space? Okay. Most of the state level interviewees believe strongly that the state was creating a very supportive policy environment, and that this need for space and flexibility was critically important and needed and wanted at the county and local levels. There was an acknowledgement that teachers and educators, administrators at the local levels are coming into this policy environment with a wide range of capabilities and capacities and backgrounds. And the hope was that the additional funding for the Common Core implementation and local control funding formula dollars would help equalize the playing field a bit. again, we're hitting a moment in time in terms of our research in the fall, so we're not going to be able to, for this research, track how that equalizing the playing field pans out. But that was a big hope.
Is that when your survey
Yeah.
was, because you said you had done the state people in
In
the
the
summer?
in the spring, we did the policy interviews in the spring of 2014, the county office in the summer, and then we did all of the field research in the districts and schools in this past fall.
In the fall.
Yeah, yeah. So we've been frantically coding transcripts since then. Did that help? Okay. And there was also the expectation that post-secondary was really coming to the table for this and going to participate actively in professional development, in teacher training, in pathways development, curricular pathways development with K-12, in helping K-12 faculty understand expectations at the post-secondary levels. It's clear that there's a big sign-off at the systems level from post-secondary, and then the question for us was, how is that translating with local community colleges and the CSUs in particular? There was a hope expressed by state policymakers that this was a great opportunity to integrate career technical education into the curriculum, and that the Common Core opened the window more for applied learning. We also probed on issues related to deeper learning and trying to understand if the Common Core is providing a window of opportunity that's necessary but sufficient, or necessary but insufficient when it gets to the deeper knowledge and skills around communication, integrations, and synthesis, those types of knowledge and skills. So we were exploring that as well. So that lays a bit of the framework for the kinds of issues we are interested in, and the timeline we're working under, and the types of people with whom we spoke. I'll read you a quote that kind of sums up the state policy perspective. This is from someone affiliated with the legislature. From a legislative perspective, we have so many questions, and we're just kind of worried. I worry that there are a lot of things we didn't think of, like when we did class size reduction. We thought it was great until we realized that we needed more teachers and more facilities. So the issue of capacity is huge, and that also points to a disconnect between state and local. I'll stop there and turn it over to Jodi for preliminary findings.
Okay, so we collected so much information, and I wish that I could share it all with you now. I tried to really synthesize and just really focus on those common themes that we found in the findings, and so I'll share a few of what I found was most interesting. So first, there seemed to be very much a disconnect between the environment that state policy leaders intended to provide and the environment that educators say that they were experiencing. So as Andrea talked about, the state policy leaders were trying to provide time and space for educators. But anxiety about time permeated nearly every interview that we did with educators. They just felt that they didn't have enough time to develop their practice, to write assessments, to do all of the major shifts in instruction that they think needs to happen for Common Core. There was a great deal of anxiety about the return of, I'll call it high-stakes assessments this spring. And so remember, we were doing these interviews in fall 2014, and so they were operating under the assumption that they would be held accountable to these tests this spring. And so we know now that the state board has given educators one more year that they won't be held accountable to the results. But at the time, they were feeling a great deal of anxiety. So the state had pushed control to the local level, and educators expressed a lot of appreciation about the control that they had. So the Common Core state standards, basically laid out what students should learn, but they didn't dictate how teachers should get students there. So they felt empowered and professionalized, but there was a lot of anxiety about time that they needed to develop their capacity. So 2014-15 seemed to be the first full year of Common Core implementation, and teachers told us about the experiences that they were having, or the changes that they were making on a daily basis in their classrooms. And the practices that they told us they were doing very much aligned with these deeper learning core competencies that we know. So things like collaboration, communication, critical thinking, mastering core content. All of those core competencies peppered all of our interviews. So it was very clear that educators understand that Common Core is focusing more on those process skills and less on content changes. Teachers seemed excited about those changes, but again, they just needed a lot of time to make those changes in their practice and their assessments. So it's unclear yet exactly how they're going to operationalize that deeper learning, but they all indicated that they understood that those changes needed to take place. So based on our research, we found that while Common Core does necessitate a significant shift in instruction, the shift will likely not be equal across all courses. So we heard a lot of teachers say that what Common Core requires in classrooms is very similar to what they've seen being done in college preparatory classrooms such as AP or Advanced Placement or International Baccalaureate classrooms. A lot of teachers mentioned either continuing using the practices that they have used or borrowing what they've seen other college prep teachers doing. And so our assumption is that these college prep classrooms probably aren't going to change a lot with Common Core. Likewise, teachers said that Common Core is also requiring what we've seen being done in CTE courses, which is the application of skills and the understanding how those academic concepts apply to real-world experiences. Teachers were, I'll say, cautiously optimistic about the integration of core academics and CTE. Many of them still see those operating on two separate tracks. So as Common Core begins to be integrated in more high school courses, I think that we're likely to see that all high school courses are more similar than they used to be, but we may not see significant changes on the CTE side and the college prep side. We found that educators and administrators are eager to utilize technology in instruction. It's clear that there's still a long way to go, but there was talk of sort of leveraging this moment when a lot of technology is being installed in schools for smarter balanced assessments. The county office role in implementation was interesting. Our research revealed a definite culture of competition among the county offices. So many interviewees acknowledged that there was a lot of collaboration going on between county offices, but county offices also compete for state contracts to develop materials. And so when they're competing for state contracts, they're not incentivized to share their information with each other. Also, given the reduction in resources from the recession, the county offices are also charging fees for their services, and so they're basically competing for districts to come to them and pay them for their professional learning services. So it kind of creates this competitive sales environment. County offices played two very important roles in implementation. They were very much a connector in implementation. So they bridged this divide between the state context and the local context. They were very much the conduit of information from the state to locals. And they were also an important linchpin in communication or in coordination between K-12 and post-secondary. So a lot of the county office interviewees described themselves as hubs or forums for educators, not only K-12 educators, but K-12 and post-secondary. The counties were also pivotal in bolstering the capacity of districts. So as we know, districts were still reeling from recession cuts, and when Common Core was implemented, a lot of districts just didn't have the capacity to develop that common understanding of Common Core and to develop the resources for teachers to do what they needed to do in the classroom. We found that professional learning communities played a pivotal role in bolstering teacher capacity at the site level. So nearly every educator we talked to talked about being in a PLC. Some teachers appeared to appreciate them more than others. I think they were more effective at certain schools than others, but they were actually all using them. And one school even described PLCs as their vehicle of Common Core implementation. So they were clearly using professional learning communities to set expectations and help teachers develop resources. There were a lot of other professional learning methods that were going on at schools. There was a lot of use of teachers as leaders. We'll call them TOSAs, teachers on special assignment. Most of the schools were using TOSAs. There was mixed reaction about teacher leaders. I think one administrator called it a weird dance between, teachers being receptive to criticism from their peers, but also teachers liking the fact that teacher can sort of relate to their classroom practice. So really quickly, I want to go through just 6 challenges and concerns that we found identified by both the county and local interviewees. There's a lot more work to be done to facilitate K-12 and post-secondary collaboration. Teachers talked about not knowing whether they were adequately preparing their students for post-secondary. They don't get any data back, they don't get feedback, and so a lot of the teachers expressed a desire to know how their students were faring in post-secondary. They talked about post-secondary being their client, and another teacher called post-secondary the big silent partner. So there's clearly a lot more work to be done with collaboration. Educators also need to know if they're implementing Common Core well. There was no rubric for them, there was no guideline for implementation, and so they didn't know on a daily basis if they were implementing Common Core well in their classroom. One teacher said, I ask myself, what will my classroom look like when it's fully Common Core implemented? And every time it's different. Then the second question is, what do I still need to do? Because none of us are there. I don't even know what it would look like when we're there, but it's great to have that conversation and to recognize that we're on a journey through this. It's not going to happen overnight. So teachers were eager to know whether they were doing it right, and there was really no one or nothing to tell them whether they were doing it right. So some of the ways that they said they tracked implementation were, just you see it and you hear it. You know it when you see it in a classroom. Using formative and summative assessments, seeing improvements in reading and writing levels, seeing students apply the concepts through performance tasks, and then early assessment program results. Another challenge is that teaching literacy across the disciplines is challenging. A lot of science teachers in those content-heavy courses told us it's really difficult to now have to incorporate reading and writing into a class where I'm already having a hard time keeping up teaching that content. The shift to Common Core is difficult for students. There was mixed reaction on what effect the rigor of Common Core would have on certain sets of students. A lot of teachers felt that there were going to be challenges for both high and low achieving students. So the high achieving students who were formerly getting A's, they had a way of doing things, and now we're throwing a completely different approach at them. So it's going to be tough for them. But also with the English language learners, we've got a lot more writing, a lot more language use, so it can be difficult for them. Several teachers said that they thought there were more opportunities for the English language learners to succeed, because there was more ways to show mastery. So it wasn't just one test, but there was performance tasks, and they could demonstrate conceptual understanding without it just being one test. Finally, teachers and leaders need help to build their capacity. So I'm going to circle back to that whole need for time. They talked about they didn't want to sacrifice their instructional time, so there's lots and lots of professional learning opportunities that they're offered each year, but they don't want to leave the classroom because that's where they're supposed to be, and they see that their students sacrifice. So the districts that we studied had 2 non-instructional days and 2 days for teachers to prep, and a lot of teachers expressed a desire to have more time than that, and they don't want that time filled with meetings. They want that time to be available for them to collaborate with other teachers. They want to be able to share resources and develop common assessments and all those things that they think that are going to help their students. So there's a great deal of optimism out there. Teachers, they have a lot of questions, but they feel that they just need time. They know what they need to do, but they need the time to do it.
Okay, so I will give a very,
Before you move on, I have 2 questions, not related to each other, but they're quick. The first one, when you were working with the level of, not district, above district.
the county offices?
County offices, thank you. Did you by any chance collect data? When they said they worked with a lot of teachers, did you by any chance get data on that, how many they actually worked with? I'm just curious what they count as a lot.
They track that at individual county offices, but I don't know.
But did you collect it? No. Oh, okay. Then my second question was, it's really encouraging to hear that the teachers were thinking this might be a positive impact on EL students. Did they mention special ed students?
There were several mentions of
At
special
the
ed.
elementary level, this is a huge, you were talking about opening doors. We're really hoping that this opens the door for special ed students, and I didn't hear you mention it. I was just curious, does it come up at secondary too?
It did come up. I was, trying to pull things that a lot of teachers had talked about, and so there were a few mentions, and it was kind of mixed reaction. Some teachers felt, they're going to get it. It's going to take some time, but they're going to get it. They have the capacity to get there. And others teachers thought that it might be too rigorous.
Similar to that, can I also ask on historically challenged students? Was there students who are struggling? Are they going to struggle more under Common Core? I don't know.
A few mentions, yeah. We call those academically at-risk populations, but kind of the same as special need or special ed.
I think
It would be better or worse?
Mixed. I don't think we can draw a conclusion. Yeah.
And we did try to drill in on issues around equity in general, and then within that bucket, when we talked about equity issues, we had different populations we were talking about. I think, and correct me if you want, but I think there's one issue is just the big concern about students who will be entering into high school or in high school now and going to be facing the exams who haven't been immersed in Common Core. And that's sort of the immediate set of issues. And then there's the concern about, okay, so students coming through the pipeline, are they going to be ready? And so there's both the short-term and long-term issues at play. And would you mind actually saying who you are? We welcome questions, we love them. Would you mind saying who you are and where you're
I'm
affiliated?
Phyllis Hellum. I work for the Department of Education in the Literacy, History, and Arts Leadership Office.
Great.
And
Thanks.
yes, I have my PhD, so I'm on all that research stuff.
And Brad Strong, children now, no PhD.
Yeah.
Great.
All right. Any other questions before I jump into some preliminary thoughts about recommendations? Okay, thanks. Any time, jump in. So this is this is very early thinking, and we welcome your thoughts, and we welcome your thoughts about where we are with these policy recommendations. They're in different themes. So one is clearly around incentives for cross-system collaboration, and there are 8 state priorities around basic services, implementation of the Common Core, parent involvement, people achievement, people engagement, school climate, access to courses and areas of study, and other people outcomes. And there's nothing that signals collaboration with post-secondary. And on one hand, we've read LAA report about you don't want to get so far in the weeds with these priority areas that it's making schools focus on the weeds rather than the entire forest. And I don't know if adding a 9th is what we're saying, but it really is more about figuring out if there are funding streams available, if there's some way to work on the issues related to, the CSU didn't get state dollars for professional development in the context of the Common Core, and there was the 1.25 on the K-12 side. Is there some kind of funding in the post-secondary arena from the state that can help with the teacher learning side? And then as there are other ways, we have linked learning, we have Career Pathways Trust, we have other opportunities for faculty to be learning across systems. Is there something bigger that can be done that hits every district and isn't targeted towards the folks that win these grant opportunities? And then forums for cross-system educator learning opportunities. There just aren't that many. And those are the types of things that the K-12 folks are clamoring for. We could say yet again what we've said in other reports about the need for cross-system data system. I think one thing is clear that the educators we interviewed want that. They want to be able to access, and I'm curious when we get to y'all, they want to be able to access the information. And I know that when a lot of this sort of data-driven decision-making started coming down the pike, it was really hard, and I know that it still continues to be hard, but I think that schools are getting more sort of acculturated in that and don't see it as much, by and large, as a big barrier, more as a way to learn. And it's very consistent with this learning environment. Much of the focus right now is on K-5, K-8 for Common Core implementation, and we do want to write about how it's really important to have this focus on higher ed as well, and what engagement looks like in the different areas in which higher ed needs to be engaged deeply at the local and regional levels. Connecting the dots regionally. In March, we came out with a report called Organizing for Success. Thank you. For design. No, we didn't do for design. Organizing for Success. And I think we're going to reiterate a call from that report, which is really the need at the state level to help regions make sense of all these funding opportunities and all these pressures and all these goals and metrics that are being required in often cases, and reporting requirements. That it's very, very challenging for regions to navigate those and to connect the dots. Resources and guidance around teacher learning and capacity building. To echo what Jodi said, that there's such a priority right now on professional learning opportunities, but not pulling out of instructional time too much. We heard a lot of people talking about they get 1 day a year, 2 days a year release time, and that's very hard to navigate the amount of learning that needs to happen right now to change instruction in meaningful ways, but ways to rethink the time that's provided for professional development and for collaboration simply within K-12 and then across systems. And then a focus on the senior year. So I know, in the media there's so much about, especially this time of year, about stress that students are under in their senior year, and then there's senior slump, and there's likely something in the middle. But there's likely, for the students who are almost ready, there are a lot of opportunities around dual enrollment and international baccalaureate and advanced placement, and there are a host of opportunities. That capacity is likely too thin. Also the ERWC, the expository reading and writing course that's aligned with the early assessment program, scaling those and having that capacity is likely going to be a big lift. But then even more so is for the students who aren't ready. And so what's in place if we're assessing in the 12th grade, students don't get their information until right before 12th grade, and the expectation is that a large proportion of students will not meet readiness standards and can't be sort of simply tipped in the senior year into readiness. And also that students don't fit neatly into boxes, that if a student is at a level 2 on the Smarter Balance assessment, that could mean a lot of different things for a lot of different students. And so how to be able to meet students where they are and offer the range of opportunities that they'll likely need, whether they're not ready or almost ready, is a big lift. Other states are experimenting with this. Washington State has a statewide course for level 2 students that's been created. California doesn't tend to go quite that route, but it seems like that's going to be a big issue to fulfill the obligation to students. Yes?
Montgomery Roseville joining the high school district. Could you describe level 2?
Sure, and David, I think you might know more specifically. My understanding from just having a meeting with Smarter Balanced is that, and you would know, level 2 is not ready and level 3 is almost
right.
ready.
I think perhaps the best way to answer the question is under the summative assessments of the Smarter Balanced system, there are 4 levels of description around their performance on the summative assessment. So I think we really need to exercise some caution that we're not saying these are level 2 students. This is one measure, a point in time, summative results that they demonstrated on this assessment, this level of performance. And the thinking is over time, obviously, we're hoping to move students through really the depth of knowledge that they need to be able to demonstrate to be college and career ready, that those are likely to be at levels 3 and 4 of their performance on the summative test, along with additional multiple measures designed by local districts to help prepare students to get to where they're going.
Thanks. That's such a perfect response, because I think our concern is that we're going to end up with these categories of students from this, and then we're going to have categories of responses about how we help them, and that doesn't seem to be productive, and it's counter to what it seems like the hopes are for this.
So,
yeah.
With that understanding, thank you for the clarification. Could you clarify the statement then that you made either right on the heels of that or just prior to that with regard to the concerns for the students that were not yet ready versus those that are?
Yep. Yeah. I think we've got, and I'm curious how this resonates with others, that we've got a lot of mechanisms in place for students who are sort of on track, and they can go into advanced placement, they can go into international baccalaureate, they can take dual enrollment. There are different, there's the expository reading and writing course aligned with the early assessment program. So we have a host of options there for students who would likely score around a level 3 or 4. What do we have for students who aren't there, and it's 12th grade, and they've likely are wanting to pursue some form of post-secondary education, but we don't have the same mechanisms or set of options there for students who aren't in that same zone, knowing it's not a clear set of boxes. Does that help?
Perfect, thank you.
Okay.
Great answer.
Okay. We're working through this as we go. All right, so 2 more buckets that we're likely going to focus on when it comes to some policy recommendations. It seems pretty clear that teachers are confused and concerned about next generation science standards, and the incorporating literacy piece, and the piece about being fearful for their jobs, that if someone's trained to teach chemistry and now they're integrating across science areas, what does that mean for them? And so that was an area with a lot of alarm bells for teachers. And then the improving communications piece, that it's clear that we're nearing this end of this first cycle of implementation, and it seems like these last 2 or 3 years of this 5-year cycle for Common Core implementation have been the sort of fasten the seatbelts, go. It also seems really clear that there's another phase of learning, of capacity building, that educators really need, that it's not a 5-year cycle and then we're done and that's it and move along. That there's a lot of supports that educators need to know if they're doing it right, and to understand, to gauge their practice against something else. Professional learning communities, interactions with the district office, the lines of communication between all the entities that we studied, it appears needs some smoothing. And then at the local level with post-secondary, again, it seems very clear that at a high systems level, there's a lot of agreement from the community colleges, the CSU and the UC, about Common Core, but what that translates to right now is not sufficient in terms of post-secondary participation.
Okay.
And Nancy's it.
Well, thank you. I'll be brief so that we can really hear from Elk Grove folks working on this. A couple of comments. I think the notion of the 5-year context, as we recall the Common Core standards, which I think we also need to remind ourselves, Common Core is focused on mathematics, knowledge and skills, and literacy, English language arts, knowledge and skills, with also a focus on disciplinary literacy in other subject areas. So when we're talking about what's happening at a high school, I think it's important to keep that in mind. And that in 2010, we adopted the standards, August 2nd, 2010. We're in the midst, really, of the recession, right? It was just really beginning to sink in and then went on for another couple of years. So while they were adopted as the next set of knowledge and skills, set of standards for literacy and mathematics, not much happened, right? Schools across the state were trying to spend the time keeping the doors open. We were laying off massive numbers of teachers. We were really lessening people at the district office. So the idea that the implementation was very differentiated across the state out there at that particular time. And it really probably wasn't until 2013, sort of into the end of 12-13 and 13-14 school year, that it became clear we were sort of coming out of the recession. We had the opportunity to recognize, we are really going to go down this smarter balance assessment system path. We're going to move towards more rigor, complexity, and imagination within the context of what we want students to be able to know and do and demonstrate. And that within that sort of shift simultaneously the fact that sort of midway through into 2014, we said, oh, and while we're at it, we're going to completely change the funding structure and the way that we ask locals to determine what their priorities are. So the notion of what's happening with Common Core implementation is, I think, so important to recognize. It's situated in this huge context of ongoing changes, the likes of which in my 40 years in this business I've not seen. And so I think the components that are indicated in the research are reflective of the diversity of our state, right? 6.2 million students, a quarter of which come to school speaking a language other than English, over 1,000 districts and 1,000 charter schools, 10,000 schools, 300,000 teachers. I mean, scale is always a part of the story in California about what that looks like. And so I think that as we began the journey in 1997 about, oh, let's move to a standards-based system where we have an opportunity to define what it is that students need to know and be able to do, we learned a lot over that first phase of that 15, 16 years that said, oh, we're always trying to prepare students for the world in which they're going to go out into. So I think we have, and you hear this all over the state, we're much better at talking about college readiness, which impacts the lowest percentage of our students, frankly, in some ways, about who does go, what percentage of high school students go on to post-secondary. We're much less clear on what is career readiness, and I know Elk Grove has done some tremendous work in that area, and I like the work that David Connolly was the University of Oregon, but sort of elsewhere as well, that we're talking about work ready, job ready, career ready, college ready, life ready. I mean, that's quite a dimension. And so for high schools particularly, and I think over the time when we were looking at difficulties with funding, what happens is sections come out of the master schedule. And so what gets prioritized? What are really the ways that a school district and schools are able to say, well, we'd like to do all of these things? And we heard that, I think, and continue to hear that around the state. And the capacity really, once we sort of started pulling out of the recession and some of the funds coming back into the school system, the focus right now on local goals through the implementation of the local control funding formula with Common Core and other standards implementation really being central to how are we going to know how well we're doing in an era where we've also sort of not until this year will we have some data about the Smarter Balanced assessments, but heck, we do end of course exams at the local level, we do chapter tests, we do assessment at the formative level, which really helps all teachers try to determine how well are my students doing, have to be sort of folded in, I think, to that context. And the issues around disciplinary literacy, as Tina and I were talking beforehand, having been around for a long time, and in the English area, we tried to do reading and writing across the curriculum for many years in the state, not very well. So this idea of literacy, disciplinary literacy, what does it take to read and write like a scientist? In addition, as a science teacher, to teaching my content, which is really the basis around which I'm working in connecting my students to career and college readiness, what does it take to read and write like a scientist or a historian or an artist? As a part of the way that we're asking students, I think, to examine from the perspective of a learner, and that means then from the perspective of the school and the district, we have to create a coherent set of experiences that really helps them become better at all of those areas. So I think the difficulties that teachers and administrators and district office folks are focusing on is there's a tremendous amount of things happening simultaneously. One of the terms we never seem to include in our vocabulary is strategic abandonment, right? What are we going to stop doing? Because it's not working, because we have plenty of evidence that it's not supporting our kids in the areas of need that they have. I mean, we just have to always have that a part of the conversation. So in schools and districts out there where there's strong leadership, where they've built on the existing professional learning communities, the implementation of Common Core went much smoother. Where there's strong support all along the school, the district, the leadership levels at the principal and district office level are working well and they're able to keep moving forward. Where they're very small districts, which remember over 50% of our districts are very small. We talk about the big population centers, but over 50% have, less than 500 students in their districts. And they're spread out geographically all over the place. So the role of the county offices there really cannot be underestimated because they really provide the backbone in some ways for personnel, for professional learning, et cetera, in those smalls. So in terms of, I think in closing, this idea that the high school students we have in our schools today are not going to come to Common Core with the same feeling that my 6-year-old grandson is, who's, deconstructing mathematics in kindergarten with his teacher, because he is going to have the benefit of all those years. The parents who are most concerned, that we've talked to, as probably many of you have, are at the middle and high school level about what does this mean, what does this look like, and students who, very good students, for example, have been answer getters, very good answer getters in their experience. We're now saying, you got to explain your ideas. You need to use more digital literacy. You need to be focused on teamwork and building collaborative ways to demonstrate your performance along with individual performance. So I think that enters into really the time issue. You hear that all over the state as well, around we need to both look at how we're using our existing time and think about the ways that we're building in opportunities to collaborate, to have students be demonstrating their levels of learning in more ways than paper pencil tasks, and how we go about building in much more digital literacy, both as a teacher and as a way for students to connect with, the learning that's out there. So reinforcing a lot of, I think, what was found in the initial survey results. We still have a long way to go. This is going to be a journey that takes quite a bit more time, and obviously the students at the higher ends of the high school have had the least amount of benefit, and let's come back again in 5 years and maybe we'll have some different stories.
Great. Well, thank you. We appreciate, we are not an anonymous district. We are Elk Grove Unified School District, and so we're very pleased to be here and to provide you with some feedback. Many of the research findings did resonate with us. However, there are a few differences, which Anna and Kathy will discuss. My role today is to really talk to you a little bit about some of the underpinnings of Elk Grove to help you understand who we are and how we approach Common Core implementation. First of all, I think that most of you know where Elk Grove is. What you may not know about Elk Grove is that we are a diverse district. We're about 62,000 students spread over 320 square miles. We have 64 schools. Our diversity ranges from socioeconomic diversity, we're something over 55% low income, to language diversity. We have 100 languages spoken in our district, to ethnic diversity. And so we may not be what people assume we are, but we certainly are a strong district and a very proud district. I appreciated both Andrea and Nancy talking about the many changes. I think Andrea talked about it as being the swirl of all of the different initiatives and policies and programs that have come on very, very quickly. And so all that swirls in this hurricane of change obviously leads us to take a look at a strategic and comprehensive and cohesive system that guides our work not only for Common Core implementation, but also for all that we do. What we're passing out is just some foundational information about Elk Grove, and this notion of change, and so much change so quickly, led us to create a comprehensive and cohesive educational vision, which we term E4. Very simple. It really is a mantra that we hope everyone in our district knows and understands. And it's quite simple. It is every student learning in every classroom, in every subject, every day, in order that they become college and career ready. So if you take a look at the elements within this E4 plan, at the forefront is high quality classroom instruction and curriculum. And that is obviously to promote college and career readiness and to close the achievement gap. We talked about the role of data. Data is so important to us that actually it is one of our key elements, and we have a strategic goal which is devoted to that, and that is that students are going to benefit from instruction that is guided by assessment results, formative, interim, and summative, and continuous programmatic evaluation. So when you talk about the need for a system, we absolutely agree with that. There is a need for such a system. We also talk about wellness in terms of physical safety, cultural competence, and social emotional learning, and we talk about parent and family involvement. So I bring that up because as we approach Common Core, we did identify these 4 strategic areas. As we look, for example, at spending our LCAP dollars, we look at 3 different elements. We look at the 8 state priorities, and as we begin to make expenditure decisions, how do those expenditures align with the 8 state priorities? Where are they within our strategic goals in those 4 areas which I just outlined? And where are they in our own LCAP objectives? And at the top of the LCAP objective, the predominant objective is Common Core implementation. But as you scan down that document, which is the second in your packet, you'll also look at, we have an emphasis on linked learning. And we have done some tremendous work. We actually, Kathy will talk to you about that. We actually are very blessed to have been a recipient of the CCPT. We also
We're not sure everyone knows what that is.
California Career Pathway Trust Grant,
Correct.
the first round.
And we also are actively working right now with both the Los Rios College District and with Sac State in terms of identifying ways that we can better prepare students and create a pathway from our district perhaps directly to the 4-year or through the 2-year system in order to ensure that students do have access to post-secondary. So with that, I think what Anna will do is talk to you from the curriculum standpoint, give you some reaction to the findings, and then Kathy will talk from the college and career readiness perspective.
Thank you. First, this always takes a team effort from the classroom to the community. That's how Elk Grove has approached it. From classroom teachers, including students in this work, we've articulated with parents, our board, community partners, our teachers and administrators, our district level management and staff to really understand and push forward the plan that we have for Common Core. When we started the implementation back in 2010-11, we really started at the awareness phase, involving all stakeholders to understand what this shift was going to mean for us as far as these new standards were concerned. We were able to determine later that our next steps included professional development and the potential for new instructional materials. We actually began engaging in that conversation at the elementary level first around mathematics. Fast forwarding to today, we have provided professional development to all of our teachers surrounding Common Core. We've engaged with all of our sites, our administrators. We are looking into how we engage our classified staff now as they are ready and wanting to be a part of the understanding of this work and their role in it. We have provided parent workshops at the central district level, as well as requiring that all sites provide parent nights and parent workshops to engage parents in this work. We have a Common Core blog on our website. We make connections to the school site websites around information on Common Core. We've done district-wide newsletters, Facebook, Twitter, and email, as well as phone calls to encourage people to attend and know more about what is taking shape.
And some of it's been in other languages too.
Thank you, Kathy. And we have also engaged multiple languages and have interpreters and have multiple materials translated into languages so that we are reaching our parent population in the best way that we can. We also surveyed our parents, our students, our teachers, our administrators, and our community around their thoughts around Common Core implementation. And that information was very important for us to know from their perspective. With that, we've also already adopted certain instructional materials. While we wouldn't think that world languages is directly connected to Common Core being ELA and math, we always have that focus on the literacy components and the literacy standards that are embedded in Common Core. And so we, through our professional development of those adoptions of world language materials, have that lens. We adopted new ELD materials for both middle school and high school. Again, continuing and making sure that we make the connection with the lens to the literacy standards, as well as the integration of the new ELD standards and framework. We have now completed our pathway of adoption of new math instructional materials, K-12. For the high school, we have determined the integrated math instructional materials and the math 1, 2, and 3 pathways of learning in coursework. To kind of help guide our work, we have several components that you can see in your packet that allow us the opportunity to delve deeper and ask questions about these elements, from building awareness, professional development, the focus on standards, which I think has been part of the greatest gift in going through this implementation, is having the time to learn our standards, which wasn't so back in the day when those initial standards were rolled out. Collaboration has been a focal point. Of course, curriculum and instruction, looking at what resources are necessary, assessment and data analysis, technology readiness is also key, budgetary considerations, of course, and communication. What we found, as Tina mentioned, we have a lot of similarities to what is reflected in the research as far as what we've been hearing in our district. Just to highlight a few is how districts have been able to take the time on their own to figure out how best to implement Common Core with the needs of our particular district. I know that was also reflected at the county level, I believe. Teachers are at different levels in their understanding of Common Core, and to some degree are learning how to figure some of that out on their own, and they're also collaborating and appreciate the time to be able to have collaboration in our district. We do have various PLC models in our district, and we definitely rely on that opportunity for teachers to be able to engage on both instructional practice, curriculum, etc. Teachers also agreed that to some extent they have more flexibility in what happens in their classroom, and that's kind of moving away from what I believe the research was also suggesting about moving away from the scripted kinds of learning and moving into more focused on the standards itself, and then what resources do we use to engage students in the mastery of those standards. Also, a similar concern that we had was in the midst of rolling out Common Core and implementing Common Core, and with the inception of the next generation science standards, how we do that very practically and comprehensively. Some of the differences that we noted is that we did start looking at instructional materials probably before a lot of districts did, including K-6 ELA, although we did not act upon that research. We had several individuals who probably felt more confident with the implementation of Common Core because we had several individuals who were taking the opportunities that the state was giving, for example, to be a part of various committees to do research and give input to the rollout of the Common Core. We also have done an exceptional job to roll out professional development and practice in incorporating the new ELD standards and framework into what we do with English language arts. We really message that they are not separate, that when we are serving the needs of our students, that they are truly integrated. Some of the impacts that we see for college and career readiness: communication. We cannot stress that enough among all stakeholders. We actually engaged with our local newspaper so that whatever messaging we were doing in district was also reaching the wider community outside the district and providing information on what we were doing, not to mention having regular presentations at board meetings, so that that information was available to the public. We are building partnerships with our IHEs and business partners so that we can engage in this work in a college career environment. And we also were able, we would really encourage considering outside grant funders. We do have involvement with various grant funders who help us to bring along our process to be able to build capacity of what we do, especially around human capacity, if you will. One thing to consider is doing an equity check. What practices are going on in your district as we consider the college career pathway being very equitable for students, looking at your practices to ensure that that what you have as your model, if you will, is not closing doors but is actually opening doors for student participation and engagement and achievement. Calibration of matriculation, I think, has been a strong point for us. Between PLCs, we have instructional coaches who are assisting us through the design of professional development, curriculum, working at the site level to do those things, engaging in the coaching model with our teachers and our administrators. We have several content steering committees who work in isolation as well as cross-content to collaborate around decisions that we're making in pathways of learning, for example, math and science. We engage because we understand the connections between those and how those pathways work together at the skill development level and at the maturity level. Curriculum development, lesson design, and then also having conversations in feeder patterns in our district, not having isolated conversations that once someone leaves the 6th grade door, now it's up to someone else, but really knowing the connections that that learning makes and how integrated it really is and how involved it is in that process. One of the last things I'd like to highlight is how much we collaborate with our union leadership, both at the classified and the certificated level. We could not do this work without working with them and having some common understandings about how we move forward together.
Okay, so how are we doing on time? I want to keep us on time. 5 more minutes? 5 more minutes, okay. All right, so I'll speak briefly then just to how this all comes together, or how we hope it's going to come together systemically in our district. As you know, Anna's described to you the specificities of the curricular focus on Common Core in my department, the focus is on the bigger picture of preparing students for college and career readiness. And Andrea, you started off by talking about the swirling initiatives, and I think that, and I guess this is kind of a compliment to Nancy, and representing the state and all of you policymakers, is that you know, we do have a lot of initiatives out there that may have seemed separate, may have been accidental, may have been purposeful over the last 5 years, but I think we're really seeing in our district kind of a critical mass coming together, that there is a linkage of the Common Core implementation to the local control funding formula, to the linked learning, to the career pathway trust. And I just want to applaud you in policy for, maybe you knew that was going to happen, and we intended for it to happen, but we certainly see it starting to come together in our district. And so in the packet that you handed out, the very last piece of paper is a brand new schematic, just out this week, in fact, that we'll probably end up tweaking, but it shows in general how we are starting to pull together initiatives and the visions for what we do, and pointing it all in the direction of preparing students to be college, career, and life ready. I think that was the major aha over the last year or so, is that really is our purpose here. Our purpose is not just to get students to a diploma, but it's to make sure that they are ready for that next handoff. And so implementation of Common Core, as well as next generation science standards and the new career technical education model standards are all part of the planks that go into our efforts to prepare students for college and career readiness. In implementation, I think our district has been fortunate. Your report does reference integration of career technical education and core academics, as well as the cross-segment work with different grade from K-12 to post-secondary. And so our district has been fortunate that we have historical presence with career technical education, including a huge support for the California Partnership Academies. And we see throughout our academies that the integration of Common Core has been probably very easy for most of them. They're already small learning communities of teachers who have background in both career tech ed and academics. And so they haven't balked at all about, now how do we bring in Common Core? How does it fit with what we're already doing? It's cross-curricular, project-based learning, real-world learning opportunities. And so I think that speaks to the value, the potential value of bringing these together. That doesn't mean that we don't still have a lot of learning to do. And many times we feel like we're building the plane as we fly it. And we put things out there, we launch things, and then see how it works, and then we learn and calibrate our performance from that. But we're really starting to see that there's a lot of power behind these multiple initiatives that are being implemented at one time. I'll just close with one more comment about commonalities of what we're seeing. Communication is so important. And it's not just communicating, to our teachers, to our principals. It's really important that we're communicating to our parents. And again, from my perspective in my department on the college and career readiness, I think it's so important, not only in our community, but for the state, that we have a single clear definition and understanding of what that means to be college, career, and life ready. And that we are expanding that definition beyond preparing students to get a bachelor's degree or professional degree. And embedded with that is also how important it is for our economy, that what we are teaching and preparing students to do is going to directly link to students' capacities to succeed as adults in sustainable jobs that promote and support our economy and keep our state and our communities vibrant. So that messaging, we need to make sure our parents understand it. We need to make sure our higher education partners and our business partners understand it, and that it's something that we all have to be working on together.
I really appreciate the reaction and just the new information that you brought based on our findings. It's really great. Our study was so small. It was only 2 districts and 4 high schools, and we were definitely not evaluating them. It was really, just how was implementation going for them. So it's great to hear that, you've shared some of the same experiences. I just want to reiterate that teachers seem overwhelmingly positive on Common Core. There just seems to be a great deal of excitement about how it can improve students' college and career readiness, how it can bring excitement back to the classroom. And I think that's where a lot of that anxiety about time stems from, is teachers are excited. They want to build those new practices. They want to incorporate collaboration and project-based learning. They're just feeling a little bit of pressure. So I think it's all good. Yeah, I think it's all good. It's all positive because there is that excitement. That there's anxiety that goes along with it. But I think that in general, it's going to be great.
Are there questions or comments? Yeah, Leanne.
I have 2 questions. One is, in your research, did you hear back from folks about difficulty in beginning their testing? Like we heard there was some confusion because the notices that contained the summative and the intern were being offered at the same time, and there had to be some clarification on that. Others had computer issues, logging on to a smarter balance side and so forth. Did you hear that a lot, or was that isolated cases?
You know, it wasn't included in our interview protocol. We did ask how the field tests went. And by and large, you know, there were some glitches, but it was mostly positive. You know, I think people expected it to go worse than it did. So there were some glitches, but basically, you know, things advanced.
My other question is, Tina, you guys have a fantastic district, so I think, you know, it's great to see all the good things going on in there. But I was just wondering, are you, even with the amount of communication that you're doing with the community, are you still getting pressure from parents because there is no API, because this test is a familiar score, and those kinds of things? I mean, how are you addressing that?
You know, I think that we have gotten less pressure than perhaps we anticipated, and that may be due to the fact that we have really been proactive in trying to communicate. There are parents who honestly have opposition to the Common Core. We have folks who regularly come to the board meeting and speak to us about the Common Core. But I think that the fact that we have tried to be so open and have provided so many opportunities for parents to understand, and certainly will continue to provide those opportunities, particularly importantly as these new scores emerge. You know, obviously communicating with parents that you cannot compare the CST scores or the scores on the CSTs with the Smarter Balance scores. So far, you know, not resounding. We've dealt with folks at the local level, and we've really tried to communicate well.
I want to ask a question myself, just because my colleague Milbury McLaughlin did some work a year ago on Common Core implementation. This is really for Anna, I think, but for Elk Grove. And one of the things she found was that there was a real problem at the curriculum. That we had the frameworks from the state, and teachers were working on lesson plans, but there was the sort of the intermediate step there, the curriculum, was a real challenge for districts. And this related then to materials adoption. Well, you know, how do the pieces fit together? How do you avoid just unitization, where you do some really cool instructional units, but they don't fit together? And how do you move from the state's frameworks, which are really big picture, to the actual instructional practice that's embedded in the curriculum? And you've been moving forward with that clearly. You've already adopted materials, but I'd like you to talk a little bit about that.
Sure. So it is true that has been a challenge, and it's really to some extent a challenge of pedagogy, only because in past practice, as I mentioned before, when we rolled out our original standards, we did it through new materials. If you remember AB 466 and SB 472, that's how teachers receive professional development around the standards. And so in this case, we received our standards. We had time before any lists of materials or to that degree. So there was a challenge in helping to understand the shift of our standards are our goal of student learning. Let's take the time to understand those. Let's break them down, chunk them, and see how it applies to student learning and our goals for student learning. So we've done that. It has not been a road without bumps. And so with that, we are helping to provide bridge opportunities of thinking around how to utilize years-old textbooks, if you will, with this new way to approach learning through the instructional strategies that we're seeing now and the standards, which aren't that different. We're still teaching many of the same skills. Some things have shifted maybe perhaps between grade levels, but helping teachers to understand how focused the standards are now, especially at the high school level, and how integrated, so cross-content, we can have these conversations in the absence of what we've been used to as far as a new adoption, if you will. So we spent a lot of time bridging, focusing on the standards, looking at how we can make connections to the textbooks we do have as a resource, but not the sole resource.
Okay.
There's one more question.
I'm going to let you ask your question after the session's over. It's 1 o'clock, and so I want to thank our panel.